By the time Cyrus stepped into the council ring, the 9 witness chairs were full, the braziers were burning low, and every person in Ironhold Keep understood that the room was about to decide what counted as law and what counted as shame. She felt the old humiliation rise in her throat anyway, the same one that had followed her since 1021, and she hated that it still knew how to find her even now, with the king watching her like he had been waiting for this exact breath. Dante Ironhold stood at the center dais without his winter cloak, dark shirt at the throat, silver authority band around one wrist, and his right hand closed around the object she had thrown at him months earlier. He had kept it, polished the same iron curve with his thumb until it held a faint shine where his skin had worn it smooth. The claiming gift looked smaller now than it had on the tribute floor, less like a trap, and more like a question that had survived every attempt to bury it. She reached him. She could hear no one else breathing. Maris stood 3 paces behind the registrar rail in chains of office that would be stripped if 6 of the 9 voted against her. Celine Ashfall watched from the noble's tier, perfectly still, as if stillness itself could hold a crumbling plan together. Rhett was on the witness bench with both fists on his knees. Torrin Blackreed stood at the chamber wall in full guard black, shoulder scar pale against his collar, eyes fixed on Cyrus the way he used to watch her footing on training ice. Dante opened his hand. The gift lay across his palm, the same forged circle, black iron lined in winter silver, meant to sit at a mate's throat and mark a royal claim once accepted in hand. He did not kneel. Kings did not kneel at claims. He held it where she could take it, and his voice carried to every stone in the room. I offer this again. Cyrus had waited years to be asked in public whether she was worth keeping. The first time the world answered, it answered no. This time, the choice was hers. And that made her more afraid than she had been the day she threw the gift at his feet, because she knew exactly what accepting him would cost, and exactly what refusing him would cost, and neither road looked easy from where she stood. She lifted her hand. Months earlier, on the day she first saw Ironhold Keep, she had come as a courier no one was supposed to remember. In Deepwinter 1026, Cyrus Windrider was 22 and known across Southwatch for 3 things, none of them kind. She ran winter routes alone when bonded teams refused the ice roads. She never lied cleanly enough to satisfy officials, and at her own naming 5 years earlier in 1021, she had stood in front of her pack, while her wolf rights were voided by her mother's sister. People did not forget a public unmaking. They just learned to speak about it softly. Maris Vale read the void order from the registrar ledger with dry hands and a voice that never shook. The report said Cyrus's wolf response was unstable and potentially dangerous to pack cohesion, words that sounded clinical and final to the elders who wanted order more than fairness. Cyrus remembered every face in that circle, who looked relieved, who looked away, who stared as if a warning had finally been confirmed. She remembered Rhett taking 1 step forward and freezing when Maris said his name. He was 25 then, already trying to keep their family from splitting. He chose quiet, and she learned what that quiet would cost. What the report hid was simpler. Cyrus had refused to falsify route losses after a grain caravan vanished near the river bends. Maris had told her to sign, told her it was how survival worked when winter claims were thin and council attention dangerous. Cyrus refused in front of 2 clerks. 3 days later, Maris filed the instability report under seal. The rejection looked legal from the outside, which was the point. Avoided wolf right did not make someone human. It made them usable and unprotected inside a wolf hierarchy. Cyrus still carried mail, medicine, and tribute because couriers were cheaper than mounted guard teams, and she could not refuse assignments without losing winter rations. She slept in transit barracks, ate after ranked wolves had cleared the tables, and learned how quickly people accepted an official lie when it helped them sleep. She was not passive in it. That mattered to her even when it mattered to no one else. In early deep winter, 2 weeks before Ironhold summoned Southwatch tribute, Cyrus took a route no bonded runner wanted, down the ice-cut ravine line where one slide could bury a team before sunrise. The package on her back held fever tincture for 3 children in Red Hollow. The safer path would have delayed delivery 2 days. She took the ravine because the children did not have 2 days. On the return leg, she passed a customs post where a captain was beating a young dock runner for dropping tariff tokens. The crowd pretended not to see. Cyrus stepped in, named the regulation aloud, and told the captain he was violating transport code in front of witnesses. Her own status gave him every right to strike her for insolence. He lifted his hand. Torrin Blackreed, then on border rotation, and her former training mentor, came through the gate at that exact moment and stopped the blow by asking the captain to repeat the order in front of him. That incident gave her no medal and no allies, only a note in a minor log that she had interfered above assigned rank. She still did it. The specific hesitation that scene resolved for her was the fear that speaking up only made punishment worse. She spoke anyway, and after that, she knew she could act even when the likely outcome was loss. Southwatch tribute to Ironhold was scheduled 3 nights later, and Maris assigned Cyrus to carry the final chest into the High Keep personally. It looked like an insult disguised as trust. Low-rank couriers did not enter royal halls unless someone wanted a reminder of their place displayed against better stone. Rhett found her tightening harness straps in the loading yard and asked if she could plead illness. She said illness would be called dereliction and give Maris another ledger line to weaponize. He touched her shoulder and said nothing else. Ironhold Keep sat above a black river gorge where the wind never stopped. The approach road spiraled through frost pines and old battle markers, each stone carved with the names of packs Dante had absorbed after succession wars. By the time Cyrus reached the inner gate, her gloves were stiff and her jaw ached from cold. Guard lines split for the tribute party with disciplined silence that made every small sound feel louder than it was. She felt him before she saw him. Every pack had stories about Alpha presence, most of them exaggerated by drink and fear. But when Dante Ironhold stepped into the tribute hall at age 31, the room shifted in a way her body recognized without permission. Conversation thinned. Banners stopped moving though no doors had closed. Cyrus kept her eyes on the chest clasp because direct stare at a king could be read as challenge, and challenge from her would be suicide. Protocol required each tribute pack to present gifts through its registrar. Maris was delayed by design, or so Cyrus guessed when the steward motioned impatiently and told her to advance in Maris's place. She carried the chest to the ring marker, knelt, opened the lid, and read the offering list from memory when her voice failed in the cold hall. Grain credits, salt blocks, silver from cliff mining rights. She expected dismissal. Dante did not dismiss her. He circled once, slow enough that she could track him by the pressure in the room rather than by sight. He stopped close enough that she caught cedar and iron and winter smoke. He asked her name. She answered. He asked who marked her courier route. She said Southwatch Registrar. He asked why she carried tribute without rank escort. Maris still had not arrived, and Cyrus heard the first whisper ripple through the noble's tier. Then Dante made a choice no one in the hall expected. He signaled for the claim casket. A royal claiming gift was not a trinket. It was ceremonial evidence. If offered before witnesses and accepted in hand, consent was established, and the legal claim could proceed through oath. Ironhold custom was strict here, which protected both parties in theory. Refusal remained lawful and created no bond. A king could pause a public claim by prerogative, preserving evidence while deferring action. Everyone in that hall knew those rules by blood and habit. Dante opened the casket and lifted the iron torque. Cyrus's first thought was not desire. It was calculation shaped by old injury. A low-rank courier publicly offered a royal claim could become a political hostage, a punishment instrument, or a cautionary rumor by nightfall. She had learned what happened when authority said she belonged somewhere she did not choose. Her hand moved before anyone could coach it. She took the gift and threw it back at his feet. No one spoke. Maris had just entered the hall and froze in the doorway with her mouth slightly open, shock cracking the composure she wore like armor. Rhett, at the far wall with the Southwatch retinue, went white. Torin, positioned near the king's guardrail, shifted one step forward and waited for a command. Cyrus stayed kneeling because standing without dismissal could be read as escalation. She expected restraint chains before she finished her next breath. Dante looked down at the gift. He bent, picked it up, and closed his fist around it. He did not punish her. He did not reoffer. He turned to the witness benches and invoked royal prerogative to pause the claim pending private clarification, preserving ceremonial record and ordering all present to silence under seal until released. His voice stayed level the whole time. The steadiness scared Cyrus more than shouting would have. He dismissed the hall by rank and told Torin to escort Cyrus to the north audience room. No chains, no formal accusation, no explanation. The north audience room had one fire, 2 chairs, and windows covered in frost thick enough to blur the moon. Cyrus stood instead of sitting. She had no idea what script this was now. Kings did not ask low-rank couriers for clarification unless they were collecting confession. Torin closed the door from outside. Dante entered alone a minute later with the gift still in his hand. He set it on the table between them and asked, "Why?" One word could have been intimidation. The way he said it sounded like demand held in check by effort. Cyrus tasted metal where she had bitten her cheek in the hall. If she lied, she might keep breathing tonight and lose everything later. If she told the truth, she might not leave the room. The specific hesitation she resolved in that moment was fear of disbelief. She decided disbelief was no longer worse than silence. "She forged my report in 1021, Cyrus said. "Maris Vale voided my wolf rights with a seal that was never authorized." Dante did not move for a count of 5. He asked 3 questions in sequence, each one narrow, each one impossible to evade. Who witnessed the filing? Which ledger volume held the report? Who had access to the registrar seal matrix that winter? Cyrus answered from memory, including names she had avoided speaking for years. When she finished, Dante reached for the door, called Torin in, and gave an order that changed the shape of the story. "Sealed inquiry. Start tonight. No registrar access." Rumors still moved even under seal. By sunrise, half the keep had heard that a Southwatch courier had refused the king and lived, and by noon the other half had decided she must have offered something in private to earn that mercy. Cyrus woke in guest barracks assigned by royal instruction, not prison, and discovered that protected status could feel uncomfortably like surveillance when 2 guards followed her to breakfast and back. Dante's first crack showed itself that day in a council prep room where Selene Ashfall was discussing border compacts with him and 3 ministers. Cyrus entered only to deliver inquiry copies. Selene called her the courier incident without looking up. Dante interrupted mid-sentence and corrected her by name, Cyrus Windrider, then instructed that all case references use legal designation until inquiry closure. It was minor, deniable, and completely out of character for a king who usually ignored social slights beneath policy level. Cyrus misread it as procedural theater for witnesses. Her wound made that interpretation easy. People in office used precision language when they needed leverage. Names could be tools. She told herself that was all it was. Torin began with records. He was 36, broad-shouldered, scarred from border campaigns, and not a man who enjoyed paperwork, which made the thoroughness of his investigation impossible to dismiss. He sealed Southwatch registrar archives, pulled wax matrices from storage, and compared impression depth under heated glass. He interviewed 2 clerks from 1021, one now retired, one currently attached to Maris's office. Both remembered the week. Neither wanted to testify publicly. Maris moved quickly when she realized inquiry's scope. She requested emergency transfer of Cyrus back to Southwatch on grounds of witness instability. And she sent Rhett 3 private messages in 2 days, each one phrased like family concern and each one carrying the same threat. If he supported Cyrus publicly, their mother's ration allotment would be reviewed, their housing lease would be audited, and every courier shift still tied to the Windrider name would be cut. Rhett brought the messages to Cyrus without opening his hands because they were shaking. Cyrus read them and felt the old split open inside her. Rage on one side, grief on the other. She wanted to tell him to burn the messages and keep his head down. She wanted to ask him why he had not done this in 1021. Instead, she folded each note, set them in order by timestamp, and told him to keep copies with Torin. Action came easier to her than comfort. Rhett looked relieved by the instruction and ashamed of that relief. Celine applied pressure through cleaner channels. She requested private audience with Cyrus in the Winter Conservatory, where glass walls looked over the gorge and made every word feel exposed. She did not insult her. She offered terms. If Cyrus withdrew all accusations and returned to courier service quietly, the Ashfall Border Compact would remain intact. Food caravans would move safely through spring thaw, and no one in Southwatch would suffer for one woman's grievance. The offer sounded rational enough that Cyrus hated herself for hearing the pull in it. "What do you call my legal status if I withdraw?" Cyrus asked. Celine held her gaze. "Administrative correction later, if needed." That answer resolved Cyrus's remaining uncertainty about Celine's role. Cyrus had wondered whether Celine was only protecting her own claim to Dante. In the conservatory, she saw the larger pattern. Celine would keep Cyrus formally voided forever if the Alliance demanded it. Cyrus left without agreeing, and the choice closed one door while opening a harder one. She could no longer pretend compromise would restore her rights quietly. Dante responded to the escalation by changing Cyrus's status from protected guest to royal witness under direct crown procedure. The shift mattered. As a witness, she could not be transferred by registrar petition, questioned without counsel, or removed from Ironhold until hearing close. It solved the immediate obstacle, her legal exposure, and created the next one. Maris had to attack credibility in public because private removal had failed. 3 nights before the hearing, Torin found the break in the forgery that rumor could not survive. The 1021 instability report carried a matrix impression assigned to Southwatch Winter Office. Under heat and ash dust, the inner ridge showed a recut notch pattern introduced in 1022 after a mold crack, 1 year after Cyrus's naming. The seal on her report could not have existed in 1021. The document was forged in later revision, then backfiled into the ledger. Torin did not celebrate. He assembled chain of custody, logged every transfer, and copied the finding to all 9 council witnesses by hand. He also pulled a storage request signed by Maris 2 months after the 1021 naming, requesting private access to obsolete matrices for audit training. The request was legal by itself. Beside the seal analysis, it became motive and opportunity in the same folder. Cyrus expected relief when she saw the proof. What arrived was nausea. Official lies had shaped 5 years of her life, and the paper confirming that lie did not return those winters. She sat on the guard stair outside the records room and stared at her boots until Torin sat beside her in full armor and said the one thing she needed from him. "Evidence does not heal," he said. "It does prevent them from naming you the lie again." The hearing opened at dusk under witness protocol. All 9 chairs filled as required for royal claim review and registrar challenge. Fire bowls were lowered to keep wax from softening on seals. Maris entered in office chains, chin high, and took her place behind the registrar rail. Rhett sat on the 3rd witness bench in plain winter cloth. No rank markers, as if stripping status could hide him from what he had to do. Selene took Nobles' tier with 2 Ashfall envoys at her shoulder, their treaty sashes bright enough to be read from the ring. Dante called order and gave the rules in a voice that made argument sound like weather, unavoidable and irrelevant. Evidence first, witnesses next, cross-examination by counsel only. Vote by raised iron token. 6 of 9 required to remove registrar. Separate vote required to overturn a void ruling and restore status. Cyrus listened to procedure like it belonged to someone else's life, because she had not been allowed to believe this kind of structure would ever be used for her. Torrin testified before anyone could redirect the room into character attacks. He walked the chain of custody from archive seal to hearing table, produced the matrix comparison, and answered every challenge in measured detail. Maris tried to cast doubt on handling conditions. Torrin responded by naming temperatures, transfer times, and clerk signatures from memory. He had built the record so tightly that even ministers who disliked him had nowhere to wedge uncertainty. Maris shifted tactics and called Cyrus unstable, repeating the 1021 language almost word for word, as if repetition could make a forged sentence true. She looked to Rhett for confirmation, expecting the same silence that had protected her before. Rhett's jaw worked once, twice, and stayed shut. Cyrus felt old disappointment start to settle in her chest, familiar as winter ache. Maris smiled and asked to enter. Family corroboration by nonverbal assent. Rhett stood up. His voice shook on the first line and steadied on the second. He said he had kept silent in 1021 because Maris threatened to cut their mother's winter allotment and blacklist him from transport work if he challenged her filing. He said he had seen Maris in the registrar annex after curfew with the obsolete matrix case, and he had watched her hand a clerk a sealed packet marked for delayed ledger insertion. He named the clerk. He named the night. He named the corridor where he waited and did nothing. Maris tried to interrupt with procedural objection. Rhett turned to the witness chairs and kept speaking. He admitted his silence had helped make the forgery stand for 5 years. He looked directly at Cyrus for the first time since entering the chamber and said, "I was wrong, and I stayed wrong because fear felt practical. She told the truth then. She tells it now." The room shifted, not in noise, in alignment. That testimony resolved the evidentiary hesitation no document could close. Torrin had proved technical forgery. Rhett proved intent and coercion inside family and office. Council members who could have hidden behind uncertainty lost that cover in a single minute. Cyrus felt the gap between past and present narrow enough to breathe through. Selene made her move immediately, because delay would only harden sentiment against her side. She requested recognition from Nobles' tier and invoked the Ashfall Compact Clause tying border deployment to a political mating schedule. If Dante proceeded with Cyrus after a restored status vote, Ashfall would suspend winter patrol support and freeze grain escort through the Eastern Pass by moon turn. The threat was clean, legal, and expensive. Dante listened without interruption. Cyrus watched his profile and finally saw what she had been missing for months. His stillness was not indifference, it was containment. The learned discipline of a man whose first expression could become policy if it escaped him. In 1023, when his former intended leaked border routes and his younger sister died in the raid that followed, he built that discipline into armor and wore it so hard most people forgot there was skin under it. She did not forget now. For one beat the story tilted into him. He looked at Selene and measured what losing Ashfall patrols meant in practical terms. 2 thinner guard lines by spring thaw, longer supply turns, hard meetings with border captains, and criticism from every minister who preferred predictable alliances to honest risk. He also looked at Cyrus and understood that choosing safety through political mating would recreate the same structure that had erased her. The cost became clear in both directions. He chose which cost he would carry. He rose. "Compact suspension is accepted," he said. "Ironhold will not trade legal integrity for mating leverage. Lady Celine's candidacy is closed by Crown decision. Celine's face held for 3 controlled seconds before pride cracked at the edges. She bowed as protocol required, withdrew her treaty sash pin, and placed it on the envoy table. Her alliance claim ended in that gesture. The chamber murmured in shock because everyone understood what had just happened. Dante had burned a border guarantee in public to keep this hearing honest. Cyrus felt the decision land in her body like impact. For weeks, she had told herself his attention might be strategy. Strategy did not surrender a compact in front of 9 witnesses. He had just paid a real price, one that would outlast tonight and follow him into every border council for the next year. The misread she had carried finally broke. The votes came next, fast because hesitation had nowhere left to stand. On registrar removal, 7 of 9 iron tokens fell to removal, clearing the 6-vote threshold and stripping Maris Vale of office in full view of the chamber. On status reversal, 8 of 9 voted to overturn the 1021 void ruling and restore Cyrus Windrider's wolf rights effective immediately, with full legal continuity and compensation review ordered by Spring Ledger. The chief clerk read the restoration into record while Cyrus stood in the ring with her hands open, so everyone could see she was not shaking anymore. Void Order of 1021 is invalidated as forged and unlawfully filed. Legal standing restored. PAC status reinstated. She had imagined this sentence for 5 years and never allowed herself to believe she would hear it spoken under seal. Maris did not scream. She smiled like someone tasting blood and said Cyrus had destroyed her own family to win a title she could not keep. Dante signaled guards before Cyrus could answer. Exile order to Northern Records Outpost, immediate departure, no registrar privileges, no contact with Southwatch offices pending criminal referral on forgery and coercion charges. Torrin executed the order himself. Maris passed Cyrus on the way out and did not look at her. Rhett remained standing after Maris left, as if sitting might count as collapse. He asked permission to address the ring directly. Dante granted it. Rhett stepped down from the witness bench and stopped 2 paces from Cyrus, careful not to touch her unless invited. "I cannot return 1021, he said. "I can stop hiding in 1026. Cyrus had rehearsed harsher answers for years. None of them fit this moment. She nodded once. Not absolution, not rejection, simply acknowledgement of a truth finally said aloud. The clerk closed the legal docket. Silence should have ended the session. Dante did not release the chamber. He reached inside his cloak and brought out the same iron torque, the one from the tribute hall, the one he had kept through inquiry, threats, and votes. Thumb-worn shine still visible on its inner curve. He stepped into the ring and stopped where everyone could see both of them clearly. "I offer this again," he said. No one moved. Cyrus looked at the torque and saw every version of herself reflected there. The girl in the naming circle, the courier on frozen roads, the witness who expected not to be believed, the woman who had watched a king spend political shelter instead of spending her. Acceptance in hand would establish consent under custom. Refusal would remain lawful. For the first time in her life, the structure around that choice was clean. She asked the question that still mattered to her. "If I accept, am I a treaty answer?" Dante held her eyes. "If you accept, you are my chosen equal. Not compensation. Not leverage." She believed him because his loss was already visible. Ashfall patrol banners were being folded in the corridor outside this room. Ministers were already recalculating supply routes. He had paid before he asked. She lifted both hands, took the torque in full view of all 9 witnesses, and held it against her own throat. "I accept." The chamber exhaled in one rough wave. Not everyone approved. Approval was never the point. Consent was clear, witness count complete, ceremonial evidence uncontested. Dante reached up slowly, asked with his eyes, and when she nodded he fastened the torque at the base of her throat. The metal settled warm from his hand, No longer an accusation, no longer a trap, just wait she had chosen. He did not kiss her in front of the council. He touched his forehead to hers for one brief second, private inside public, and stepped back to finish the legal sequence. Oath date set for first thaw. Joint authority terms drafted before moon turn. Witnesses dismissed under open record, no further seal restrictions. Torin remained at post by the door with his expression finally, barely, easing. After the chamber emptied, Rhett waited near the archway where torch smoke thinned into cold night air. He asked Cyrus if she wanted him in Ironhold for Oath Week or if distance would make breathing easier. The question itself mattered more than any answer. He was asking instead of assuming. She told him to stay in Southwatch and rebuild what he could there, starting with courier protections for low-rank runners. He agreed before she finished the sentence. Celine left before dawn with her envoys and a reduced escort. She requested no private farewell. Her final message arrived through formal courier, sealed and concise, stating that Ashfall withdrew personal claim and acknowledged Crown authority over mating choice, while reserving right to renegotiate border terms after spring. Pride remained intact on paper, and that was likely the best ending either woman could have offered the other. The political cost reached Ironhold quickly. 2 eastern outposts reported delayed resupply after Ashfall escorts stood down. Dante shifted guard rotations, canceled a ceremonial hunt, and redirected silver reserves to hire neutral mountain guides for grain caravans. Ministers complained. He listened, made cuts where he had to, and never suggested retracting the choice. Cyrus watched him work through those decisions night after night, and understood that love in this world looked like policy as often as it looked like touch. Her own costly choice arrived with less ceremony and no audience. Southwatch sent petition asking her to remain in Ironhold permanently and surrender all claim to local administration for stability. It was framed as mercy. Accepting would spare her daily conflict with the people who had let her be erased. Refusing would pull her back into that history with authority this time, visible and contested. She signed refusal and attached a request to audit every voided status ruling from the previous 6 years, starting with cases filed under single registrar seal. The request reopened old resentments by design. She chose it anyway because restoration meant little if it ended with her alone being corrected while others stayed buried. Dante read the petition, looked at her for a long second, and said only, "Approved for Crown review." No praise, no warning, just alignment. She felt seen in the way she had wanted all along, not for softness, for seriousness. Spring thaw came hard and early in 1027. Ice broke along the gorge in loud midnight cracks that woke the keep and made everyone pause between breaths. On the morning of their oath, the council ring looked different in daylight, less like a tribunal and more like a place where a world could be rewritten if enough people were willing to pay for it. Cyrus entered in formal winter silver trimmed with Southwatch blue, no borrowed crest hiding where she came from. Dante wore the crown band and no cloak again, the same deliberate exposure he had chosen at the hearing. 9 witnesses took their chairs by law. Torin stood command side with ceremonial blade. Rhett had traveled overnight and arrived with road dust still on his boots, positioned in the public tier where Cyrus could see him clearly. Their oath language balanced authority with consent in a way that would have sounded impossible to Cyrus a year earlier. He swore protection without ownership. She swore partnership without submission. Both swore to uphold legal standing across rank lines under council review. When they spoke the final binding line, the room did not erupt. Ironhold did not do loud joy in public. It stood, which in that culture meant recognition. Later that afternoon, Dante signed the reform Cyrus had drafted with 3 clerks and Torin's procedural notes. New law required independent witnesses for all status rulings, never fewer than 2, and any void order affecting wolf rights triggered automatic Crown Archive review before enforcement. The law did not erase what happened in 1021. It made repetition harder, and in governance that counted as mercy made concrete. Maris's criminal referral proceeded through Northern Circuit. Cyrus did not attend. She sent records and a written statement. No speech, no theater. Rhett wrote once a month from Southwatch with updates on courier protections and ration appeals, each letter awkward and honest. Each one evidence that silence had ended in practical terms rather than apologies alone. Their relationship rebuilt slowly, with fewer promises and more follow-through. At night, after councils and route briefings, Cyrus and Dante learned each other in the unglamorous rhythm that comes after public vows. He still woke before dawn on raid anniversaries and stood at the window until his breathing settled. She still scanned rooms for exits before sitting. Neither habit vanished because love arrived. They adapted around each other with the patience of people who understood wounds as history, not failure. One evening, in late spring, she found him in the archive hall holding a small carved wolf token she had never seen before. It belonged to his sister, lost in 1023 and recovered from an old campaign chest. He handed it to Cyrus without ceremony, letting her hold the grief he rarely named aloud. That was his vulnerability, not declarations, the choice to place memory in her hands and trust she would not use it as leverage. She answered in the language he understood. She brought him the first completed audit list from Southwatch, 14 names, 3 immediate reversals recommended, and a plan to fund legal review teams without draining Border Patrol reserves. He laughed once, brief and surprised, and said she had turned his court into a machine for inconvenient truth. She told him that was exactly the point. By mid-spring, couriers in Southwatch received printed transport protections signed by Crown and local command, including penalty schedules for officers who assaulted low-rank runners at customs posts. The young dock runner she had defended in deep winter sent a note with clumsy lettering thanking the Queen who remembered the small people. Cyrus read it twice, folded it into her ledger, and kept moving. The claiming torque stayed at her throat during councils and on long route inspections, the same object that had once hit stone at Dante's feet, now marked by both their choices. People still stared, some with approval, some with calculation, some with old prejudice that would take longer than one winter to fade. Cyrus stopped flinching under those looks because the legal ground beneath her no longer depended on whether they approved. On the first warm night when snowmelt stopped smoking in the gorge, she and Dante stood on the western wall above the pines and watched patrol fires move along the borderline that was now thinner, harder, still holding. He asked if she regretted accepting him, given the cost paid by both Crown and court. She considered the question seriously because easy answers had nearly killed her once. "I regret the years stolen," she said. "I do not regret this." He nodded like a man receiving terms he respected, not reassurance he needed. His hand found hers. Steady, unhurried, in plain view of the wall guard who pretended not to see and smiled anyway when they passed. By spring 1027, Cyrus Windrider ruled beside Dante Ironhold as queenmate by witnessed consent, legal record restored, wound answered at the exact level where it had been inflicted. The room that had once decided she was disposable had watched her be chosen and watched her choose in return, and this time the judgment could not be argued away because it was written in law, carried in cost, and held by both of them every day after the ceremony ended.